Lily McMahon, author of the award-winning book series, Mortimer and Me, a chapter book series for ages 6 through 10. And I'm here doing my second video in a series of videos about my writing process. I've had a lot of questions over the years about how do I go about writing these books. Mortimer and Me is an 8-book series about a moose named Mortimer and a boy named Jimmy. And so I spent the first video talking about brainstorming my ideas, and I shared that I have a journal for each of the books that I write, where I just in longhand will just write out different ideas that come to mind, and then I take some time to do some research. The books take place in Wisconsin and I live in Arizona. So a lot of people ask, why are you setting your books in Wisconsin? Well, there is a story behind that, and I might as well share that now. In that people say, where did you come up with the idea for Mortimer? And Mortimer actually was a character that my dad created when I was growing up, and he would tell me bedtime stories, and he had this character named Mortimer, and Mortimer was always getting into trouble. And I could still hear my dad's voice saying, Mortimer, go help someone else. And so I always liked those stories. And in fact, when I finally decided to write a story about Mortimer, I asked him, do you remember any of those stories that you told me about Mortimer? And he said, what stories are you talking about? So he didn't even remember, so I couldn't get any ideas from him. But he has since passed away several years ago. And I just always liked the name. Now, my dad's Mortimer was a donkey. And when it came time for me to, when I decided I wanted to write a book and I wanted to use Mortimer, I didn't really feel a donkey, as Mortimer. So my husband and I were on a trip to Alaska. And as we were going through the usual touristy things, and we went up to Denali Park, and we thought, well, surely we'll see a moose somewhere, and so we were looking everywhere for moose. And when we were coming back on the train from Denali, there was a big old moose standing right in front of the train station, like he belonged there. And so I always was enamored with moose. And then when we were in Ketchikan, we came across a gift shop. And the name of the gift shop was Mortimer and Company. So to me, right there, that was a sign that Mortimer needed to be a moose. And so that's how that idea came from. So from there, I brainstormed my ideas. I did a lot of research. In Arizona, we do not have moose, so I couldn't have my setting be in Arizona. And so I thought, well, let's research some different places that maybe have had at least some moose sightings. And I know that a lot of moose are in Canada and up in the northern part of the United States. So I do have a connection to Wisconsin, because I do get a lot of people that ask, have you ever lived in Wisconsin? And I have never lived there, but my great-great-grandparents immigrated there back in the 1800s. And so I thought, moose are not prevalent in Wisconsin necessarily, but there have been some sightings. So I said, that's close enough. I'm going to set Mortimer and Me in Wisconsin. So that's how that came about. That answers that question. But from there, I shared my brainstorming ideas. I did a lot of research on Wisconsin, a lot of research on moose, and all of those kinds of things. And so at the end of that video session, I said, okay, next we're going to go into how do I take those ideas and actually turn them into a book. So today's session is about outlining. Now, I shared last time that there are two kinds of authors, basically. If you ask any author if they're a pantser or a plotter, which are they? And basically, there are those writers that like to plan out everything ahead of time. And so they'll outline, some do very extensive outlines before they even start writing the book. Others like to write by the seat of their pants. That's why they're called pantsers. And so they'll just sit down and they'll let the characters take them wherever they want to go. So the first couple of books in the series, I actually just kind of pantsed them. I thought Mortimer's a moose, he gets into trouble, he meets this little boy, and I just kind of came up with the ideas as I went along. And as I went through the series and they got a little bit more detailed, a little bit more complicated, I thought I really need to sit down and plan this out a little bit better. And so that's when I started outlining. So I kind of want to go through my outlining process. It's not as boring as it sounds, but I will just kind of give you an idea of how I get from this with all my ideas and outlining and everything to actually getting on the keyboard and to start getting those ideas down in a cohesive manner so that I can see how my plot is going to develop. And whether you're writing a 15,000 word chapter book like mine are, or you're writing a 90,000 word young adult fantasy, basically the technique is the same. And one of the books that I highly recommend, and you'll hear a lot of authors also recommend this, it's called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Now, the original Save the Cat book was written by a screenplay writer who designed the whole plot and the instructions in the book for how to write a screenplay for TV or movie. And Jessica Brody was an author of novels, and she decided to take that same concept and apply it to how to write a novel. So this will take the 3-act structure, which a lot of playwrights use also when they're writing stage plays, and it actually helps you plot out where these different things are going to happen. And so I actually start with, before I even start on the outline part, I start out with my characters. So that's always the number one place you want to start, is with character development. And so I develop my characters and I write out a character description. Especially important for this new Mortimer and Lily series because I have a new illustrator. So she is not familiar with the characters. There are some new ones, but there are some of the same characters that were in the original Mortimer series. And so I write out a description of what they look like, a little bit about their personality, a little bit about their background, so that she has an idea of where to start, at least start sketching what the character is going to look like. So I start with those character descriptions, and then I go into the actual outline. And so for that, I came up finally after the first couple of books, and you'll kind of notice if you read that series, that Mortimer and Me series, it definitely, my writing skills definitely developed through it. And so I started probably around the 3rd book coming up with a basic process, or I should say a better word would be like a format of how my books were going to look. And so my chapter books have usually about 10, sometimes 11 chapters in them. And so they're pretty long chapters, but I break each chapter into 3 scenes. And so I kind of get an idea of what that chapter is going to be about. I have a title for each chapter, and then I'll have 3 scenes that will gradually build and be able to connect each chapter, one chapter to the next. And so I start with the scenes. Now, the definition of a scene, you can get a lot of different definitions, but basically, because I have had that question, how do you know when you're at the end of a scene and it's a new scene? So it's basically whenever there is a change of some sort. It could be a change of setting, like where your characters are, or it could be within that setting. It could also be the time of day. So you might have one whole chapter be one day, but maybe they start out at the breakfast table, and then maybe they're in the classroom, and then maybe they're walking home from school. So each one of those would be actually set in a little bit different place. It might be the same day, but it might be different times of the day. So each time you start a new scene, you're going to have, every scene has a beginning, a middle, and an end to it, just like every chapter has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and so does the whole book. So you're just taking that whole plot arc from the book and you're basically sectioning it out into chapters and then into scenes. So let's see, another like chapters, when if you're going to have to say 10 chapters, if you decide that's how long you want your chapters to be, then how do you know when it's the end of a chapter? Well, that would be a more significant break. Like maybe it's the next day, or maybe it's a couple of days, or maybe it's like the following Saturday or something. So a significant break in time would be a nice break for where your next chapter would go. It could also be if you're introducing a new character, that would be a good chapter break. Also, you want your chapters to have some sort of a cliffhanger at the end that makes your reader want to go on and read the next chapter. And so each one is going to, like I said before, they're going to connect together, and then one's going to lead to the next. So within that structure, and this is where the Save the Cat comes into play, is that you can map out where your turning points are going to be. You know, or for instance, your inciting incident. That's like the most important thing towards the beginning of your book. You're going to set up your book. You're going to introduce your main character. You're going to give the reader an idea of what that character's life is like, maybe introduced to the family, or whatever the situation is. You're going to give us a sense of what your character's goal is for the whole book, and then all of a sudden something's going to happen that's going to turn that world upside down for that character, and that is what is called the inciting incident. And I'll point out how that works in the first book when we take a look at my computer. So beyond that, you have to have certain obstacles in the way. You know, your character has a goal, but there have to be some obstacles. It's not going to be smooth sailing, because that would be a boring book. So you have to put some obstacles in the way. Maybe there is a antagonist, you know, like the mean girl at school, or a bully or something like that. You're going to introduce some sort of different people or different obstacles in the way of that goal. And then there'll be some turning points. There'll be some aha moments, like the character goes, oh, let's try this instead. And you're going to have those kinds of things, and you want to do that on a fairly regular basis so that the pacing of your book keeps the reader wanting to read and keeps the story moving forward. And so then towards the end of the book, you're going to have the actual climax, where either the character reaches their goal or maybe they don't, because sometimes that happens too, but maybe their goal changes too. Maybe they came up with another idea, and then you have your final resolution. So once you start outlining and start pinpointing where those places are, it is so much easier when you can sit down and actually fill in the details and get the personalities out and really develop your story. So that's an overall view of that, but let's take a look at how I actually put it on the page. Okay, so I told you a lot of things. Now let's see what it looks like. So here is how I set up my outline on the keyboard. So I start out, now the first book in the Mortimer and Lily series is called Moose in Training. And so the premise, I start out with the premise, which is basically just a real short summary of what the book is about. And so 8-year-old Lily begins 3rd grade with a new hairdo, new clothes, and a new determination to have an epic year. And then I just go from there to introduce her teacher, which is a character that plays a big role, Mrs. Murphy, her best friends, Kieko and Gabriel. They form a club called the Shamrock Squad. And then, of course, Mortimer is a big part of this as well. And the basic premise is that Mrs. Murphy has assigned her 3rd grade class to work in groups of 3 or 4 kids to come up with a community project. So the Shamrock Squad, there's an underlying theme of Ireland, by the way, because Mrs. Murphy is from Ireland. So we have a whole Irish theme going on as well. So they come up with, they have a lot of ideas, but it has to include Mortimer, of course. So that basically is their goal, is to come up with something that no one else has thought of for their community project, and it has to include Mortimer. So you can imagine the obstacles that would come from that. And then after I have the premise, then I just have the list of characters and a basic description of how old they are, who they are, you know, what's the relationship to each other and that sort of thing. So cast of characters, just like you would have in a play. And then the goal. So that's how I start out the outline. And then I start breaking it up into chapters. Now, one of the things that I decided to do in Moose in Training is I really want to show the quirkiness of Lily's character. So she is very imaginative, and she comes up with what she calls mash-up words, where she takes 2 words and she mashes them together to make a new word. So there, in the beginning of each chapter, there's going to be a mash-up word of the day. So the first one in chapter 1 is superb plus fabulous equals superbulous. And so then I use that word somewhere in that chapter to describe something. So you can see in scene 1, she is introducing herself to her audience. We get to know her, and I identify immediately the first thing in the Save the Cat structure is your opening scene. So I identify that as my opening scene. Then I go on to scene 2. They're going to do back to school night. And then we meet some more characters by scene 3. So that's the end of chapter 1. We go into chapter 2. We have another mashup word, first day of school, and just kind of setting up the whole project that they're going to have to do. Nothing it happens too much until the third scene in chapter 2 is where this inciting incident occurs. And this is where everyone else in the class has come up with their project except the Shamrock Squad. So this is what turns Lily's world upside down. Okay, what's she gonna do? She's never missed a homework assignment. She's never done anything like this, but she really has kind of run out of ideas at this point. So then we move from there. They take Mortimer through a lot of different, what can we have him do? He tries to be part of the safety patrol, and that's a disaster. So everything they try is a disaster. In fact, by the time you get to chapter 4, the mashup word of the day is catastrophe plus disaster equals cataster. So it gives you an example of some of the things that are happening. So by the time we've got chapter 4, the second scene, we have the first complicating action. And that is pretty much where Mrs. Murphy pulls Lily aside and says, Mortimer cannot be part of the safety patrol. This is not working. And then she comes up with another idea, which is going to be a positive. The turning point, the first turning point, is things are looking up. So basically your plot is going to have a lot of ups and downs in it. You know, you're going to have turning points that are positive, and then boom, there's going to be a complicating action of some sort. And so if you can space those out, and that's the key, is to try to space them out enough to keep things interesting. Then we're in chapter 5, which is at the end of chapter 5. I label this the midpoint because now we're halfway through the book. And so we should have a pretty good idea, you know, of where the book is headed. but we still don't know if she's going to be successful or not. So we go on more, let's see. So chapter 6 has a complicating action in it. The second one, and we go on to chapter 7. Still don't have an idea yet, but finally by the middle of scene 2 of chapter 7, we finally got the turning point where she comes up with an idea for what Mortimer can do to help and what their project will be. But we're not done yet because we still have 3 more chapters to go. So we've got, I introduce a character that is a mean girl, and she's the one that kind of, does everything that she can to sabotage any of Lily's ideas and put her down and all of that kind of thing. So you've got that relationship going. We've got another complicating action in chapter 8. And then we go on to chapter 9. And there's another good thing. So we've got a rise in our action with Lily's another idea that she's finding. And then finally chapter 10 is the final chapter, and that's where everything comes to a head. We have the climax in scene 3, and then finally of course the resolution at the end. So what I have done, and then the other thing to remember about an outline is it's all telling, okay? I'm basically telling you what is going to happen. So the next thing that I'm going to do from here, of course, is to take the outline and actually show my reader what happens in each of these things. This is where you add dialogue. This is where you add some backstory, some description, and all of those things that bring your story to life. So once you get this basic structure, now you can take off and do the pantser part and let your characters tell the story. So that's what I'll get into next time. But before I get into the actual writing of it, the next video will be an interview with my new illustrator, Tanya Bowerly. So we're going to learn a little bit about her and what kind of progress she is making on the illustrations. So stay tuned for phase 3 coming up.